Hi, my name is Mairéad Loftus and you're welcome to Inclusion Health Voices from the Margin. This is part of Inclusion Health Voices from the Margin webinar series. We are bringing you this episode from the Irish Association of Directors of Nursing and Midwifery conference. I am delighted to be joined today by Jono Lancaster, author, presenter, speaker and founder of the charity Love Me, Love My Face. Jono, you're very welcome to Athlone at the Idnam conference. Would you, just for our listeners who might not be familiar with your story, can you just give us a background to your story?
Yes, of course, and thank you for the warm welcome. It's really appreciated. So my name's Jono Lancaster, 39 years old, and that's how I would introduce myself normally. And as I get older, I'm very mindful and aware on how I share my story. But for the benefit of podcast and for people that haven't seen me, I was born with a visible difference. I was born with a condition called Treacher Collins, which has affected me since birth. And it wasn't an hereditary thing. I was a sporadic mutation, so it was a shock to my birth family that I was born with Treacher Collins. Treacher Collins is, I don't have any cheekbones, so my eyes droop downwards. My ears haven't developed properly, call them my little Bart Simpson ears, which I absolutely adore. I do have a narrower airway, which for me means I snore when I sleep, but for others, they need a tracheostomy to help them breathe. And at birth, my birth parents felt it was best that we went our separate ways. So they left me in hospital, and social services in Yorkshire, Wakefield, Yorkshire, had the task of finding somebody to care for me, and they did, and that was the start of my journey. Yeah, led to a life with a lot of unexpected adventure, to say the least.
I've read your book during the week, Not All Heroes Wear Capes, and it's just such a fabulous book. And you referred there to your foster mum, and she came out very much as a hero in the book. But going back, because we're dealing with healthcare professionals, and I suppose our target audience for this podcast is healthcare professionals, just to the start of your story at your birth, and just your feelings around that, or your thoughts around your birth and your parents.
My birth is something that I've thought about a good chunk of my life, especially around birthdays, Christmas, like special occasions. I give it a lot of thought. And as I've got older, I've set up a charity, the Love Me, Love My Face Foundation. And I have travelled the world meeting new families that have babies born with Treacher Collins. And they always talk about how the birth and the health professionals in particular, more often than not, haven't had a helpful impact on them. They have had the child's been born, and then the child's been taken away straight away. And they've had questions, and they've had side looks of how was the pregnancy, how were the scans, did anything come up? And the new parents are like, what's going on? Everything was fine. And they were like, oh no, everything's fine. And again, they've been denied that skin-to-skin contact, which is so important in some cases. And eventually, they've been able to make that bond. But I often think about when I was born, what kind of support were my birth parents given? Yeah, it can have a massive impact on that. Those first few moments, your first child. Well, in my case, I was their first child. So yeah, those moments at birth are incredibly precious. And I know sometimes having a child with a medical need can be traumatic, and there's things that need to be done to keep the child safe. But be present in that moment and still remember that there's a lot of feelings and there's a lot of love in that moment that needs to be given. So yeah.
So it's more than the diagnosis. It was the whole issue around attachment and where your parents maybe congratulated and all of that. Is that where you're coming from?
Yes, for sure. Congratulations. I'm glad you brought that up because when I get introduced to a new family, the first thing I say is congratulations, and they'll cry and they're like, not many people congratulate us. They'll say sorry. The first thing they hear is like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and and oh, it's yeah, the birth of another human. That's this tiny little human that's been brought into the world. Congratulations, welcome to the community, welcome to the family, what have you. And our families get. I'm sorry. So yeah, that's huge. There's moments in our life that we think are so small, but and I'm sorry, and changing it to congratulations, regardless of whatever's going on. It's a massive, it sounds small, but it's actually massive.
It's turning it into a positive, and it should be. It's because it's a new life coming into the world, yeah, and needs to be loved and cared for.
Yes.
Yeah, I have an aunt who's a retired teacher, and she always says about the children that all children need is hugs and love, and after that, everything else falls into place. So it's that's kind of similar, isn't it? The congratulations piece.
100% agree. And the lady that social services introduced me to, a lady called Jean, she embodied that love, hugs. Yeah, I was introduced to it later on in life when I was 2 weeks old, but thankfully I was introduced to
Tell
it.
us more about Jean.
So Jean was a foster carer she was in her 40s at the time, had divorced a cheating husband, raised her own two children, lived in a council house, loved to dance and do gymnastics in her youth. And she'd retired and she decided to foster children with disabilities. And the social services introduced her to me. Hey, there's a boy in hospital called Jonathan. Birth parents don't know what to do with him. At this stage, would you like to meet him? Jean's always told me the story that she couldn't wait to meet me. But there were always these conversations around my face. You need to be prepared for the way he looks. He looks different. And that just went over Jean's head. I mean, she's not even 5 foot, so most things go over her head. But especially words like that. And she met me at 2 weeks old. And she's always told me when she first saw me, she couldn't help but smile. Okay. When she first held me, she just felt this instant connection, this instant bond, and took me home later that day. Tried to reconnect me with my birth parents for the next 5 years. Sent them like progress reports and photos. They all got declined. So I was placed up for adoption officially when I was around 4. And Jean was unable to foster me at the time due to low income. But by the time I turned 5, she eventually was able to foster me and gave me the second chance of having a forever family in a forever home. And 18th of May 1990 is the day I was adopted. We had a party. I got cake and I got some presents and all my friends came over.
Every kid's dream, yeah.
Yeah, and to me, it felt like I had 2 birthdays, my actual birthday and my adoption day. My adoption day is something that we still celebrate. And yeah, she is my very first hero, and I'd hate to think where I'd be without her.
She seems to have been that one trusted adult, that brought you along and gave you that security and that grounding. Was it always that way?
She has been my consistent in my
Okay.
life. And one of my biggest fears in life is when she's 82 now, and I do fear today that she's no longer a part of my life physically. I know she's always going to be with me spiritually, but yeah, not being able to go and see her, that's something that I've thought about a lot, especially as she gets older. But she's just given me this beautiful foundation, and we've not always had the best relationship. I was an angry teenager,
Okay.
And we did fall out a lot at times, and I pushed her away, and she was always present, always there, always loving, never shied away from a question that I had, no matter how difficult it was. What's happened to my birth parents? Why haven't I got a dad? Why do I look different? Why are people pulling their eyes down? Why are people calling me names? She never shied away from a question. She just answered honestly in words that I would understand depending on my age.
Okay.
She loved unconditionally. Yeah, she's a pretty special woman.
Sounds like a dream.
She she
A
really
model
really is.
parent.
Yeah, she's pretty mega.
And it was a big undertaking, really, because she took it by choice, you said, to foster children that had a disability or perceived disability. And how did she find, we'd say, and even you as a child, navigating the system and coming into contact with healthcare? How did you find that? What was your experience?
My mum was always told that I might not be able to walk, I might not be able to talk. They didn't know how I would develop mentally. She was encouraged to take me to a school for people with special needs. My mum was like, "No, he's going down to the school with down the road with all his friends," and I'm really grateful for that. That definitely helped my development and my social skills. That was right for me, and we always used to have to go down to Great Ormond Street Hospital
Okay.
for a lot of my checkups, my surgeries, and she always made sure that she got me homework, maths work for the train ride. She always tried to explain to me what was happening, why it was happening. Our trips to London, they were regular, but she always tried to make them fun. And I wrote about it in the book. We always had to go down. We'd have my appointment, surgery, hearing test, speech therapy, whatever it was. We would always go to the finance department and sit in this corridor, and she'd have all these receipts and she'd put them through this little window and she'd get the cash back. And we didn't have a lot of money, but she'd get all this cash and she would go and buy us pizza or take me to Covent Garden and have my caricature drawn. And yeah, she always made it special. It was something that me and her did. So yeah, the healthcare system for me and my mum, or for me personally, was always fun, was always a positive experience. I remember staying on the Peter Pan ward. One of my first heroes is a nurse called Rachel who used to stay behind after a surgery and collect stickers with me. And when she saw my hairy legs, when I first started getting hairy legs, I'd be like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. I have a lot of positive experiences within the healthcare system because my mum and her communication skills were just amazing. And the nurses and the surgeons, they always showed human love to me. There was never, I always knew their names. There was always a little bit of contact between me and them. They was present. Whatever it was, they were present with me. And that was huge for me.
And when you say present, what did that look like?
Eye contact,
Okay.
body language, face to face. They're not on a computer side eyeing them. They always seem to have time for me. No matter, again, my questions, my curious mind. Yeah, eye contact, letting them know what their name is, body language, time. Because I know in the healthcare system, you've got a million people to see, or sometimes you've got all this information that you want to share to the patient, and you just want to get it out there. But yeah, the pitch of your voice, your body language, is huge, and people felt present with me, and I often felt alone in the world. So I recognise when somebody's in a room with me, or not. I'm not on about physically, when they are in a room with me emotionally. And I know a healthcare professional has to be professional and has to switch off, but I can definitely feel when somebody's in a room with me or not.
Well, it's hard to be human and not feel, people's emotions. And I think in healthcare now we're beginning to recognise that you have to let down the shield a little bit. But that's lovely to hear that you had such a positive experience. But your mother seems to have been very much a part of it. So it was that kind of family-centred care piece that brought you along. And, Jono, you could talk in your book, and there's one line, I said to you beforehand, I wouldn't say it till afterwards, but it struck me. You talked about compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. What did you mean by that?
So we all feel emotion. We all crave connection. And I've travelled all over the world, and we feel the best or most honest or truest connections when we don't think we're better than them. We're not comparing ourselves to one another. We're just there on the same level, two human beings connecting. And when we get that, when we feel that, when we understand that, you just feel these beautiful connections with literally anybody. And I went to Ghana a few years ago, and I was working with refugees, and I was asked to do a presentation for them. And I was like so nervous because I was like, how can I connect with these people? I shared my story, and they all came up and they wanted to hug me and high five me, and we did self love workshops, and we all just connected on a human level. I've done speaking events where I worked with a financial, though it was a male dominant market, a male dominant room, all suited and booted. And I thought, how can I connect with these people? And I did my thing. So many of them stayed behind. And in those situations, we were equal. I didn't think I was less or I was more. It's We're all human. And once we get that, we can connect with anybody. And that's pretty special. We seem to be living in this world where there needs to be a hierarchy, or
You're right.
and that saddens me.
And I suppose that comes back to the title of our podcast series, which is Inclusion Health. And in nursing in Ireland, we've 3 C's that we go by: compassion, care, and commitment. And I think that's why that line stuck with me. And I think you go on further in that line and you talk about compassion becomes real when we recognise our shared humanity. And your book seems to talk a lot about humanity, authenticity, and I suppose dropping the ego, doesn't it?
Yes, ego. And I learn about ego when I've gone through breakups. And when you go through a breakup and that other person's dating somebody else, and you look at that other person and you're like, oh, are they more good looking than me? Have they got a better job than me? Why have they gone from them to me? Or we have a job rejection, or like, why have they got it? And there's self love, and then there's ego, and there is a difference there. But if you drop that ego, and have a little self confidence and appreciation and a kindness towards yourself, then you're going to navigate the world in a much calmer place. Because, yeah, I think ego creates a disconnect for sure.
So, if you were to say anything to healthcare professionals across the board, to people that work in healthcare, from the porter to the nurse to the person on reception to the person in the shop to the kitchen, the catering staff, to nurses, to doctors, what would you say to them if they met somebody who they perceive as different? How should they manage that person when they meet them?
Be in the moment. Today's the 2nd of October, 5 p.m. Be in the here and now, like I'm in this room with you now. And that's how I wrote my book. I wanted people to feel like I was present with them. When I do my speaking, I want people to feel that I'm present with them. And if you're like anybody within the healthcare system, be present, smile, say hello, be present. And that massively helps people, especially when you've spent so much time. For me, I have a lifetime of trauma. And even today, I can go on my social media and I read a comment today on my Instagram. It looks like my face has melted because I've been standing in the sun too long during this summer. I have all this trauma that I'm carrying around with me. And then when I go to access the healthcare system for an appointment, there are times when I just feel a little bit more vulnerable. And then I meet whoever it is I'm having my health appointment with, and I sit down in the chair. I have all this lifetime of trauma, and I'm looking at you for a little bit of hope or a little bit of understanding or a little bit of patience. I'm very sensitive to what you are going to give me. And again, the eye contact. You might not all have the answers. All you might have is presence. I'm here for you. In this moment, I'm here. And that's massive.
And that's interesting because on the first podcast in this series, Dr. Sharon Lambert spoke. Sharon does a lot of work about trauma service design. And Sharon spoke about that. She said it comes back to the basic thing of kindness and present and actually thinking, And sometimes, when you listen to other people who talk about trauma, they talk about look at the person who comes into your service like a guest, not as a consumer, like a guest. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is it? Be respectful.
Respect is huge, and I've never thought about it like that. As rather than being a consumer, being a guest. That's I love that. Take a seat and like you would treat a guest. Are you warm? Are you comfortable? It's yeah. I love that, and it is that's very much true. I think.
For those that are listening, go out and buy the book because there's the great exercises in it that I did, and they're just really, really reflective. And why the exercises in the book? Because it's quite an interesting way to do that.
I didn't want it just to be about my life story. I wanted the reader to be able to take away something. There's a, a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions, and I know it can be quite triggering. And I just thought if the reader could, as they read the book, if they could look at themselves and reflect on themselves, and then I could give them a task or something that helped me, if I could give them a little takeaway as they read the book, I thought, okay, that'd be kind of cool. I, yeah, that's me as a person. I don't know. I like to, I wouldn't say help people, but I hope people, when they meet me or they have an exchange with me, I hope they have something positive to take away. And yeah, I like the tasks.
But coming back to your story and the fostering piece, tell us a bit about that.
Reflection is something I've always done. I've always, in my life, I've said, how could I have done that better? Why has that happened? That reflection is something that I've always done, and I think naturally that came out in the book. And then in the growing up in a fostering environment was amazing as well as heartbreaking, and there was moments of joy, but there was also moments of sadness. There was sharing your home with people and then never seeing people again, sharing your toys, birthdays, Christmases, and then never seeing them again, or sharing my toys, but then the following day them bringing drugs into the house or running away or the police being involved. It was so many highs and just, well, there were no villains, there were no bad people, there were just people seeking to be loved and have a place of belonging. There was just so much rejection in lots of different forms. And I also had a lot of guilt that I had this consistency in my life, and all these other children that came to stay with us, some were long term, some were short term, they had to move on and go to a different family for whatever reason. And I always felt guilty that I was one of the only ones that was able to stay with my mum. When my mum first got me, she looked after two other children, and she was only allowed to adopt one of us. So they ended up being introduced to new families, and everything worked out well for them. But yeah, it was difficult at times for sure. Yeah.
So, but you had overall, your experience was positive because of your mother.
I do have a positive experience, and if anybody tells me that they've fostered or adoption, my heart just goes, "Oh, you're a beautiful person for doing what you do," because it takes a lot of something special to open up your home and your heart for people. And yeah, I got a lot of positive thoughts and emotions around my whole fostering experience. Yeah.
We actually, we did a webinar series to go with this podcast series. And we had one speaker on it who was a fantastic speaker, but was from the LGBTI community, but also had a disability. And that particular speaker, when we were, chatting on the webinar, said that actually when they got older, it was the disability that was the bigger factor in their lives than the actual LGBT, factor in their lives. And for you, is it a chicken and egg situation, or which was the bigger challenge for you as you came into adolescence and transitioning into your 20s? Was it your condition, or was it the fostering, or was it a combination of both?
Um, and it's a very difficult one to answer. What being rejected by my birth parents or growing up with my visible difference, I've never kind of separated them.
Okay.
They've always been almost as one. When I hated my face, I hated my birth parents. When I loved my face, I have become at peace with my birth parents. There's very much there.
Intertwined, sort of.
Yes, yes. I wouldn't say one is more or less than the other. They definitely hurt at different stages more than others, but they are just so entwined.
When you were going through your youth, we'll say into adolescence and all of that, which is a challenging time, you mentioned in the book that one person, your hero, your mum, that you started to push her away and to push away the people in your life. You started to push them away. Tell me a bit about that, and where was that coming from?
I I have this memory of my mum taking me to Europe. I was 15 or 16, and we were out together. I remember, well, I get really embarrassed about when I have this thought. Because I say to her, I don't want to be on holiday with you. I want to be with my friends. Because they used to go on holiday together. And she just cried. And I was like, so horrible and so rude for me to say that. And I had so many beautiful friends at that time as well in my teenage years, and they would always invite me to hang out with them and holidays. My mum would always support me in any way, and I all of a sudden developed this attitude of this is my face. Nobody understands what it's like growing up looking like this. I'm the only one that's got this face. This is me against the world. They don't get it. They don't understand. And I isolated myself, which was wrong, really wrong of me, because there are so many people in life that you meet and they don't have the answers, but they can share a moment with you. It might be a handshake, it might be a hug, it might be a conversation, it might be a smile. But those moments can help us heal, can help us reflect, can help us feel, can help us understand. They just can, whatever it is we need, those moments can help us. And they don't have to have all the answers. They don't have to have been through what you've been through. So that was really wrong of me. But as a teenager, I obviously didn't get that. And I was just angry, I was lashing out, and I was putting walls up that was just isolating me even more.
And the other thing that I think you alluded to in the book, that which is common with a lot of, I suppose, teenagers that are struggling, or are in their heads trying to figure out what is going on in their lives. You talk about risk taking and sort of seeking attention through maybe being the person who was always up for it. And was that coming from the same place?
It was coming from the same place for sure. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be accepted. I felt like I needed to do extreme things because that was my ticket into the friendship group. That was my ticket into the party. That was the ticket for me to be accepted in whatever situation I was about to be in. And I didn't have any boundaries. I people
Okay,
pleased. And that made me very vulnerable.
absolutely.
And I spoke about my first intimate physical relationship with somebody else. And when I was writing about that, I was very mindful on how I wrote that. And I put myself in a lot of situations that I didn't want to be in. And the other person in question, they were definitely trying to find out who they were as well. So yeah, it was a very difficult relationship. But I had a relationship, and that's all that mattered to me in my head.
That line I read out there about compassion, because we talk a lot about compassion in healthcare, and then you sort of wonder, are we doing it? And kindness. But another thing that we tend to talk about now is authenticity. And what struck me, just listening to you now, is that you said you wanted that to be involved, that you weren't really being yourself. You had a different cloak on to try and be that person. But that, tell us how you got to where you are now, that you're sitting in front of me and you're very much your authentic self.
Yeah, the how I got to where I am today has been a lot of trial and error. I spent a lot of my youth wearing a mask, faking my emotions. And I found as I've got older, I found myself meeting people where I showed vulnerability and I showed glimpses of my authentic self. And that other person that I showed to it received it in a
Okay.
positive way. They thought it was cool. They thought it was attractive. They connected with it. They were like, oh my God, I felt like that too. And so I was relearning that it's actually okay to be my authentic self because these people are seeing it in a positive way. And I was like, oh, I kind of like that. And then the more I've done it, the more normal it's become. And now that's my norm. Oh, I can be my authentic self and people will receive it in a positive way or see it in a positive way. And that's been huge. But it's getting harder and harder to do because when social media and online has become a big part of our life, we don't see those authentic people online anymore because there's filters, there's trends that people need to follow, there's engagement, there's likes, and we're always comparing. But if you put that to one side and you do your day-to-day life as an authentic person, you're like, people really get you. And then now for me, when I do my social media, I'm doing my authentic self and I do get trolls, but I also get a lot of love and a lot of just amazingness from life. So that's how I became more authentic, or I believed in my authentic self. People think vulnerability is a weakness, and I completely disagree. When we're vulnerable with somebody, trauma bonding is completely different. But when we're vulnerable and when we're real, when we're authentic, you lay down these beautiful organic foundations that are really healthy and really strong. So I'm all for being vulnerable with the right people, but it takes a lot of good boundaries to be able to do that.
And when you talk about boundaries, I'm sitting here of a certain age, and I won't say the age on, but a good while in healthcare, just let's say. And I know myself, I'm only discovering boundaries, true boundaries. But I think that has come with confidence as you go through your career and as you go through life. You begin to figure out where your boundaries are. So, talk to me a bit about boundaries, because you talk about it a fair bit in the book. And I have to say, it resonated.
Boundaries is something that, like yourself, I've struggled with. I didn't have any boundaries. Throughout my entire, again, that reflection, for me, it became, I didn't have boundaries because I didn't want to be rejected. I had rejection at such a young age that has come back time and time again in my behaviour. And boundary setting is something very hard because of that rejection. I felt like if I was at a party and they're like, "Oh, Jono, I dare you to down this bottle of whiskey." If I said no, I would have been rejected from that party, from that friendship group. So boundary setting, and then when I got work, "Oh, Jono, can you do this extra shift?" If I said no, then, "Oh, I'm not a good work, I'm not a good member of the team, and they're going to reject me from the team, or I'm going to lose that job." Or when it came to intimate relationships, "Oh, can we do this, this, and this?" I can't say no because I'm going to get rejected again. So boundary setting is something that I still find very scary, and I get anxious when I do it. But I found the more I do it, I'm recognizing when people accept my boundaries, they're my people. There's respect there
Okay.
in work, in love, in friendships, in family. And in the book, I talk about recognizing the right environment or the right people for us. When you set a boundary and somebody rejects that boundary, they are not a person for you. And they need to look at themselves and like, why are they rejecting that boundary? Yeah, boundary setting's massive, and we should honour people's boundaries. We should be able to talk about them. We should be able to share them. We should be able to set them with one another, because that keeps us safe, and we all have the right to feel safe.
Feel safe. That's a loaded word, isn't it?
It's it's a hard. Feel safe. I mean,
What does it mean?
now that I've said it, and I'm like, it's a massive word. Feeling safe. Feeling safe is huge, and that's a deep. Um, so I've just started a new relationship, and there's a lot of boundary setting. There's a lot of trust building. There's a lot of foundations being made, and safety is massive. It's trust. It's I'm setting this boundary, or I'm setting this like or dislike out there, and I'm trusting you with this. And if that and this person who I'm dating in question is like, okay, I've received that. I'm honouring that. That's me feeling safe. And if I now I'm very pick up at feeling vibes and energies. If I don't feel safe in my gut, I am like, oh, why? And there's that reflection coming back. Oh, I'm not feeling safe. Why? And sometimes it's past traumas, that learned behaviour, and I'm trying to, hey, is it past trauma, or is there a red flag here? So yeah, feeling safe is big, and it's very deep, and there's a lot of layers to feeling safe.
Yeah, because in healthcare, we talk a lot about patient safety, and some people would view it that it's the concrete stuff, the physical stuff. But other people would view it that it's a holistic element, that it's, the physical along with that whole emotional package as well. So I think that's why when people sometimes say safe, is it a throwaway statement that we haven't really thought about? Like, what do we actually mean? And does it come back to that compassion and kindness and care and commitment piece?
In my response to your question, what does safe mean? I went straight away with emotional.
Okay.
My answer and my thought is emotionally safe. And that's why I gave that example. I didn't even think about being physically safe because to me, that's obvious. Being
Okay.
physically safe. We're all good at keeping physically safe. We all know not to hit somebody or cause somebody physical harm. Yeah, we can safe. Make sure you cross the road and watch for cars going over. That's obvious physical safety, but emotional well-being safety, that's something that we often forget about.
I think you're right. I think you're 100%. So maybe in healthcare we need to broaden out our vision of what safe is.
Yeah. And we've got a load of policies and procedures as well that keep us physically safe.
And we've less that keep us emotionally safe.
Yes.
And keep the person who's a guest of our service emotionally safe. You mentioned there that you do workshops and you do your thing. What's the thing?
My thing, I sit down with my therapist. Every time I do a workshop or I do a public speaking event, I always sit down with my therapist because I need to check in with my triggers and my trauma and my whatever may have happened. And so we sit down and he's like, "So what have you done?" And I was like, "Oh, I've done this, this, and this." And he's like, "What feedback have you got?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's amazing." And he's and then as a personal level, he's like, "What did you do?" And I was like, "I don't know." And then we strip it back, and one of the things, I don't know what I do when I do my speaking events, but I have so many people come to me like, "Jono, I felt that." Even with my book, or you can listen to it on audio, Jono, I felt that. I connected with that. And I find, or now I'm learning that my thing is I'm very good at being present with people. And that is a gift that I have. 'Cause it can happen with strangers or people that I've met before. I'm able to be present with people in a room. I think that's what we all need, because so many people look for a magical cure. We look for the perfect diet, or we look for a therapist or a counselor or psychiatrist, or we look for something. But what we need is somebody to be present with us, and that allows us to be vulnerable, to feel safe emotionally. And then all of a sudden, somebody to listen to us, somebody to hear us, just somebody to be a sponge in that moment, just feel. And that's what I do. That's what my thing is. And
That sounds beautiful.
yeah,
It does. And I can feel it here sitting with you. I suppose we're probably coming to the end of the podcast, but if there was anything I suppose, key message that, or key thing that you'd like to say to healthcare professionals?
I know the care sector is hard, and I know the care sector demands more and more and more from you every shift, every day. Just try and pause for a moment, try and stop and remember why you're there, why you do it. Because sometimes we forget about the people that we're there for, because it's deadlines, it's paperwork, it's a job, it's I've not had a day off, it's looking forward to your annual leave, it's going the extra mile. Just pause for a moment and remember why you're there, and just connect with those human beings again, including yourself. So yeah, be kind to others and be kind to yourself. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Jono.
Well, thank you
Thank you.
for inviting me. And I feel like, for me, every time I feel very lucky as well, because I feel like I've had a conversation, and it's also healed me. And I feel like I love a cup of coffee. We've just had an espresso, and I'm like, oh,
A flat white.
a flat white, and I'm like, oh, I need a coffee to get me through it. Human connection fills my cup up like nothing else does. And so yeah, thank you for.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Today's episode was produced by Annette, Cuddy, Director of the Centre for Nurse and Midwifery Education, Cora, Appelbe, Specialist Coordinator at the Centre of Nurse and Midwifery Education, Mayo, Roscommon, Alan Meaney, radio producer. And I'm Mairéad Loftus, Specialist Coordinator at the Centre of Nurse and Midwifery Education, Mayo, Roscommon. We would like to say a special thank you to the Irish Association of Directors of Nursing and Midwifery Conference Committee for having us here today. Thank you.